Well, if you've been following me for any length of time, you're probably wondering, how did America's man's man get to be America's man's man? And I'm so glad you asked. See, my grandfather, Michael A. Lorano, was what I consider to be the ultimate America's man's man. He physically defended others. He risked his life, and more than once, to keep people safe. And that's what spurred me really to mention that, is that it's Memorial Day, and he fought very bravely around the world as a Navy man in World War II, when America was facing one of its biggest existential threats. And though I didn't know it at the time, or he didn't know it at the time, my government school teachers certainly didn't, the values that he and my grandmother, a fellow entrepreneur who grew up during the Great Depression, making them the greatest generation that ever lived, the values that they possessed were born out of a very rugged individual, exceptional Americanism, or American exceptionalistic Christian worldview. And it's that Christian American exceptionalism worldview which was responsible, either intentionally or unintentionally in their lives, for all the blessings that they bestowed upon others and enjoyed themselves. It was a better time. I remember once my grandmother, whose dancing school exists to this day. It's called the Lillian Arden Champa Dancing School, and it operates in Linfield, Massachusetts, my hometown. I remember my grandmother watching Home Alone 2. She peeked in for a moment and wanted to know what was on there. And to her, that was a horror movie. She couldn't fathom how my brother and I could sit and watch these videos with people getting knocked in the head over and over again. She thought it was unhealthy and alarming that such a thing could happen to such a young child, and she shook her head and left the room. Today, we're so shocked and awed by so many things that it's often difficult to have the wherewithal to come up with productive solutions to anything. So you might be asking, well, why America's man's man? Pete, why are you so down on feminism? I'll tell you. See, feminists, and again, I do call them some pretty dirty things from time to time, but only because if they really got down to what it is, it's not a very good thing. The feminists have gotten so caught up in these questions that came from people like Margaret Sanger, whose ultimate goal was to exterminate the Negro population, was her ultimate goal. And, regardless of what you may think of that, when you have hate in your heart, you can't really do anything else. So this my grandmother anyway, she said once, Peter, there's certain things that a woman just shouldn't do. Being a fireman is one of them. Naturally, I agree with her. I mean, sure, you can be one, just like you can join the WNBA. But in the end, girls, is it really worth giving up your attractiveness and losing the possibility of landing that special man who can do all those things you really dream of? Of course not. The feminists have sold you a really, really big lie, and if you're not careful, it will destroy you. Now, why? Why can't I have it all? Why can't I pump those muscle shots and have the man of my dreams? Well, the truth is that men just don't find that kind of thing attractive. I mean, I suppose if you watch enough Home Alone 2 type of movies and that sort of thing, then there are certain guys who might have a thing for it, but when you really get down to it and live that lifestyle with them, over time you'll get bored with that sort of man. So, on this Memorial Day, I'd like to remember the ultimate man's man in my life. Oh, but why America's man's man? Pete, you may be asking, Peter, don't you care about the women? You don't care about us. You know, I've seen it and heard it all. And the truth is, I do care. And that's why I'm America's man's man. I'm America's man's man because I know, ultimately, and even in the present, you can't be happy as a woman if the men in your life aren't happy. And there's enough collateral damage from the men who are not in your life and living in America, even around the world, that even if they're not in your life, so to speak, if the men in America are not happy, then how are you going to be happy? See, the fake news thrives on telling the stories of the men who do evil. And that's why the fake news wants more and more men to do evil. Did you know that when you act like a man, you're really encouraging actual men to act more evil? Now, I know that's not your intention. I know that you have been sold a lie by the fake news media that you want to have it all or whatnot. And you can have a lot of things, so long as those things don't deprive you from your essential femininity. Like my grandmother, Lillian Arden Champa, had. And that caused her to create really one of the first exercise programs and ultimately dancing schools. She was actually commended by Ronald Reagan. President Ronald Reagan wrote her a letter commending her for her work, as did the mayor of Boston, the hub of the universe, commending her efforts, bringing an entire community together with good values and good song. Well, we've come a long way from Lillian Arden Champa's time, my grandmother's time, and my grandfather's. People have spent a lot of time watching The Idiot Box, and I do mean The Idiot Box. Turns out our English teachers were right. Today, of course, we have far more advanced idiot boxes, like the one you're watching this episode of America's Man's Man on. But don't worry, I have our best interest at heart. So, why America's Man's Man? Who is this dude calling himself America's Man's Man, and what gives him the right? And you ain't nothing special, America's Man's Man? Maybe not. But what I do know, ladies and gentlemen, is that when the men in your life, even those who aren't directly connected with you, aren't happy, you're going to be scared when you go out anywhere because, well, the fake news has fed you all of the stories of bad things that happen when the men in the world aren't happy. But what about us? What about us women? If women ran everything, the world would be a better place. And that's precisely... First of all, that's not true. But I do agree that women would probably be less likely to start a war. What does that mean? Well, it really takes a man to hold other men in check, to make sure that unjust wars don't break out, to make sure that good people are not put to death. What do I mean by that? At the end of the day, and this is what my grandfather Michael A. Lorano knew, and my grandmother Lillian Arden Champa knew instinctively, because God placed his fingerprints in all of us. It's what makes us human. And back then, they didn't have the idiot box meddling with their minds, trying to subvert America for profit so much. When the men in any given society, including God's exceptional nation, the land of the free, the home of the brave, America, when the men are deeply troubled by something, nobody's happy. Nobody's happy. Nobody is safe. We've learned this time and time again from watching all of the evil acts of men, rebelling, lashing out in their own way, from grade school and Columbine all the way up to notables like Timothy McVeigh and that dude who went to Harvard and is now known as the Unabomber, living out his life sentence. In fact, he wrote a manifesto. Again, this was not a Christian. This is not an American Christian. And so he didn't have Christ. He didn't know any other way to present the message of the forgotten man that President Donald Trump represents now. So he turned to violence, which was wrong. But for whatever reason, even the feminist fake news saw fit to print for everybody to see his Ivy League explanation of the excesses, of the troubles with the excesses of technology in the world. Christians don't turn to violence as a means of solving problems. Not unlawful violence, not domestic violence. That's different from a just war theory where America agrees that it's time to hold terrorists like the Islamists in check or South Korea. But I'm not talking about that. We're talking about holding each other accountable right at home. Women can't do that. It's just not the nature of the universe. And the more women try to be feminists, try to act like men, the more agitated the men of America will become, the more unkind, the more uncivil, and the more unlawful, senseless violence, like Columbine and the other tragedies I've listed, will continue to happen. I'm America's man's man because the best way to look out for, to protect real American women, is to encourage other men to do the right thing. Not in that sappy, deluded, infotainment, psychosis-influenced kind of male feminist way, because nobody likes a male feminist. It's kind of like when you're on an airplane, right? And the informational video reminds you to make sure you put your mask on first, your oxygen mask on first in the event of an emergency, before attempting to help anybody else. Because if you don't put your own oxygen mask on first, then how will you have the wherewithal to be able to put that oxygen mask on your loved ones or even strangers you'd like to help? It's kind of like Jesus said, take the log out of your own eye before attempting to remove the splinter in someone else's. People who don't do that end up, well, they're hypocrites. Not because they want to be hypocrites, but because that's the natural end of someone who preaches to others without first having lived it, him or herself. In the same way, before attempting to legislate, to preach solutions for women, we men have got to hold our own in that ruggedly individualistic Christian Trumpian way. We have to be like my grandfather, the ultimate man's man in my life. One of them, anyway. The man who looks out for others and who speaks the truth. Consequences be darned. I'm America's man's man and I encourage other men to see themselves as America's man's men because if we don't care for each other, and if we don't encourage each other, if we're not here for each other, then we will create a truly unsafe. I don't mean in the way millennials talk about safe spaces. I mean, we won't have the wherewithal to enforce, to maintain a truly safe living environment for our women, and that's why I mean, on the flip side, I would encourage women to think about that the next time you try to be the man, because we've had a couple generations now of unisex bathrooms and men who are dressing up as women and beating them in wrestling matches. Is that feminism? Is that what you really want? Of course not. And the best way that women can do their part in helping men to create this safer environment where men are faithful to those whom we love is to be the best girl that you can be, to be the best woman that you can be, and don't medicate yourself in such a way as to try and be something that you're not, namely a man. Even if all the men on television have told you that that's the only thing that we respect, we're not going to respect you unless you can go out and bring home the bacon or bring home the bread or be the breadwinner or any of that lunacy. If you're a quality person, if you're a quality girl, if you're a quality woman, that's not what God called you to be. I mean, if you want to settle for a subservient lifestyle where you're always fighting to survive, like that Gloria Gaynor song, I will survive, go on now, go get out the door, you ain't well, then you're going to get the frilly pants disco man, and maybe that's what you want. But, of course, you'll get bored with him over time. I mean, if that's your ultimate goal, then, I mean, if you don't think you're worth more than that, go ahead. But if you're a woman or girl of value, then strive for better. And let me tell you, you can't be your very best if you're trying to be something that you're not, any more than America's men can't help you very much, can't be there for you, can't be the man of your dreams if they're questioning, if they're the Q in the LGBTQ acronym. And the truth is, absent media psychosis, nothing is making them be that. It's your choice, men, and take it from America's man's man, it's a bad choice. So, if you're a man, be the very best man that we can be, so that we can bless the men and women in our lives, and so that maybe we can make the world, at least America, the good, safe, truly safe, Christian world that in the name of American exceptionalism, in the name of the Constitution, in the name of the Bible and the Christ upon which America exists and is dead apart from, America's man's men shall make this country, this nation, God's exceptional nation, and are making God's exceptional nation the land of liberty, of freedom, of bravery, of goodness for all who inhabit this happy place. You heard it from America's Man's Man. We'll see you in the next episode.